Hello, Exiles. I am at what you would say is a crossroads of sorts. I really want to play the new blood skills, but right now I'm having trouble on deciding what route I want to go. I've come up with two possible routes to go, and there's strengths and weaknesses to both. Let's start off with the first one, which is Elementalist Exsanguinate. This is the first one that came into my head when seeing the new blood skills, looking at the level gem 20s, damage scaling, stuff like that. Exsanguinate has a ton of scaling. You can get up to basically 3k roughly dot DPS per second base dot from the skill itself, because it does 1k damage times 3. You can stack it up to 3 times. The way I went about scaling this was pretty much grabbing a lot of life on the tree and all the fizz dot clusters, along with all the fizz dot nodes, which are here, here, and then the generic node of growth and decay, and then going the route of 2 cluster setups because they are adding cluster notables specifically for fizz dots. And that's what I went up going here. Now, why Elementalist? It seems kind of counterintuitive. Elementalist playing a physical dot build, it just doesn't make sense at all. The reality of this is Elementalist is just generically strong. We lose out, the only thing we lose out from Elementalist is 10% elemental damage on each of the small nodes. So we lose 40% damage, we're not getting benefit out of that, but all the other notables are very powerful. From the golem nodes itself, we're getting like 200% damage, 300 to 400 life regen, we're getting attack and cast speed, we're getting a lot of good stuff just out of the golem nodes, ailment immunity. These things are helpful no matter what build you're playing, pretty much it is applicable and it's strong. Bastion of Elements is a huge amount of basically mitigation. It's extra mitigation against elemental damage. We got a decent amount of notables on the tree. Just on the tree itself, I think we have around 20 or so notables, not including the cluster jewels, which will give us another 10 notables there. So that would be roughly I think that's like a 2200, 2300 elemental damage shield there. And then Shaper of Winter. When it comes to Elementalist, if you're thinking I want guaranteed shocks or guaranteed chills, and you're choosing between Shaper of Storms and Shaper of Winter, always Shaper of Winter, never Shaper of Storms in my opinion. The reason being is you can always go with Cold Conduction, and Shaper of Winter gives you a 15% base chill, whereas Shaper of Storms gives you a 15% base shock. If you're using Cold Conduction, you're still getting a 15% base shock, but not only that, but you also have the benefit of being able to have a 15% base chill instead of a base of 10%, and you can scale it all the way up to 40% chill. I cannot stress enough how powerful 40% chill is on bosses. It's close to cutting the bosses in movement speed and attack speed in half. When it comes to fighting a boss that's on turbo, if you have Shaper of Winter, you can essentially give them 40% chills pretty guaranteed without almost any investment, just using things like hypothermia. I think it's Divergent Burning damage support gem. There's Enhance. There's using specific cold base skills to trigger it, like Vortex, stuff like that. You can get 40% base chill on pretty much any boss without actually scaling into cold dots at all, or cold ailments at all. And those chills make boss fights way, way easier. So this has a lot of generic power here, and then it's in a decent spot in terms of being in between the fizz dot nodes, the dot nodes over here, some cluster jewels, and low life if you want to go Petrified Blood, which is I'm kind of thinking I want to do. The problem with Petrified Blood is one-shots, and that's my big dilemma with Elementalist. I remember playing Righteous Fire Elementalist last league, and the big problem with it was squishy to one-shots. So that's the one drawback I have here. I really want to play Fizz Dots. I think this will have a ton of DPS. I have some kind of decent ideas for how to scale it and whatnot, and I'm excited about it, but the one-shot potential, getting frustrated playing and dying randomly here and there, that's what worries me. And that's why the other option I've come up with is an Inquisitor. I think Inquisitor has the best potential to be able to utilize Petrified Blood because you can scale into Energy Shield as well. So that way you don't have such one-shot potential while also remaining quite tanky, having a lot of sustain from Inquisitor. The unfortunate thing about Inquisitor is if you wanted to go the dot route, you only have basically half an ascendancy because the other nodes on the tree do not help physical dots at all. So for Inquisitor, my idea is to go cast on crit with it. Cast on crit because you get a lot of flat crit chance, or a lot of percent crit chance from being Inquisitor. You get Conk Ground, you get regen, and you can do stuff like Battle Mage, which Battle Mage I think is very, very strong, and I don't know if it's underrated. I think at this point a lot of people realize it's really strong at this point. So this is the other option I'm looking at. looking at the skills themselves, why I think Cast on Crit is the way to go if you're scaling a Reap build. Reap, I'm looking at this gem, and I'm noticing some things. One thing is the blood charges. They say gain a blood charge if the skill hits an enemy and none of them die. To me, that means if I'm using Cast on Crit, I'm still going to hit the enemy with Reap, and I'm still going to be able to gain blood charges for single target. This also means I sidestep the downside of spending a bunch of life on Reap because I'm doing a Cast on Crit setup. I have like a low-cost Cyclone versus a high-cost Reap. So not only do I not lose the sustain from having to cast high-cost Reap, because this will actually scale quite high. You'll see the base cost of Reap is 46. You add in 6 links of supports, that cost is going to go up to like 150, 200, that range. Then you multiply that by 2. If you get full blood charges, it goes up to 300, 400 life cost per second. Or not per second, per cast. And then if you're casting faster than one's, like, if you're casting twice a second, that's 700, 600, 800 life degen. And the cast speed could even be higher than that, especially if you're going for something like Spell Echo. So Reap, I think this is a scenario where people are going to try Reap and they're going to be disappointed, is if they scale a lot of cast speed with a 6-link Reap and then they just destroy themselves from the cost of Reap. I think the best basically sidestep of that is something like Cast on Crit, Cast while channeling. I think those are the ways to get around that downside. Another thing I noticed with Reap is Reap has a cast time of 0.8 seconds. Now I'm just pulling up Freezing Pulse as an example. Freezing Pulse has a cast time of 0.65 seconds. This is a way you balance skills that are stronger than other skills. For example, Reap has a lot more base flat damage when you consider the blood charges than Freezing Pulse, but Freezing Pulse has a faster cast time. But when you're using Cast on Crit, these skills become equal because it's not about the cast time of the skill, it's about the cooldown. So things like Cast on Crit make skills like Reap better because they make them more equivalently balanced against skills like Freezing Pulse, so to speak. So I think Reap is a really good candidate for Cast on Crit, so that's why I'm considering it there. One thing I've noticed, and these are some other thoughts that's going on in my head when I'm looking and I'm thinking about doing an Elementalist. Another problem I've noticed when I'm looking at Exsanguinate is it doesn't really look like it has that good of clear. Let's try to get to the Exsanguinate clip. This guy's using chain, so he's chaining from enemies to enemies, but you'll notice on the gem it says it only can target up to like 9 enemies at level 20. So if you go into a pack that has like 40 enemies, you're going to have to cast that skill 4 times to kill the enemies unless you go chain. So it feels like it's mandatory to use chain if you're using Exsanguinate or use a separate clear setup, because I don't think, like when I'm watching this video, he shoots here and it goes out to here. That doesn't seem like it's got good range either. I think Exsanguinate is going to feel very bad clear-wise unless you do chain. I feel like chain's going to feel mandatory. So I think Exsanguinate is going to be more of a single target skill, and if I was going to go the Elementalist route, I might use something like Reap for clear, because Reap, when you're watching the video, Reap seems like it just has a junk load of AoE to begin with. You'll see he casts here and it clears all the way over to here. Now, I don't know how much area of effect this character has invested. I tend to think it's not like super high invested because I think they want to keep the showcase fairly standardized in terms of what you should expect when you pick up the skill for the first time, so to speak. But Reap seems like it has a lot of AoE just innately in it. So I think stuff like Reap is going to be a lot better for a clear, whereas Exsanguinate's not going to feel too good unless you get something like Chain on it. So those are kind of the thoughts I have right now. I think I'm probably leaning towards Inquisitor, but at the same time, I really like the idea of scaling a Fizz Dot, because you get things like Pride, you get Flesh and Stone, you get War Banner. I'm looking at using a chess piece like Victario's Influence. This is just one of the ideas I had here for a way to scale Fizz Dots. If you go with Victario's Influence, this chess piece gives you a 30% reduced reservation, so you can have a lot more reservation space on your auras pretty much for free, as well as it gives you generosity support, which is important for things like Pride, like Flesh and Stone, the things where you're scaling aura effect onto enemies, so you don't get the downside of it not affecting you, because all the auras you want to affect other enemies, and you can use this node here for Petrified Blood, because Petrified Blood isn't an aura, so you won't get the downside of it getting supported by generosity, but you'll get the upside of reduced reservation. So with this chess piece, you could get away with Petrified Blood, Pride, War Banner, and you could do Flesh and Stone supported with Maim, and you'd still have 5% mana left over. It's like a 95% reservation if I did the math correctly. So that's another thing I was looking at. I think that would be kind of cool for Fizz Dots, but then you'd have to go probably a 2-hander to get a 6-link Fizz Dot, stuff like that. all kind of ideas basically flowing around my head, and I'll eventually decide on one, but I'm struggling a lot more than I normally do for a league start, for being like, okay, this is the build I'm gonna do. It's giving me a lot of turmoil, so that's just where I'm at. I'm in between Inquisitor and Elementalist. I'll probably decide by maybe tomorrow, and then I'll try to flesh out one of these builds more than what they are right now. But I'll leave just the pastebins to just my tree planning I put in the video below if you're curious. So anyways, that's where I'm at with deciding on what blood skill I'm going to start with. Hope you guys have a good one. Thanks for watching the video. Peace out.